everyone, and welcome to this edition of Immersive Espresso. We are here with Evan Weissman, co-founder of Buntport Theatre that most folks probably here know, and also founder of the world's first Civic Health Club, I believe. Warm Cookies of the Revolution, that we'll hear quite a bit more about in a minute. But I just want to say, since we're a relatively intimate audience today, let's try going it kind of conversational. So instead of using the chat, if you're on the Zoom, you are welcome at any time to kind of just jump in to the conversation if you do have questions or anything that you'd like to chat more with Evan about. If you're on Facebook Live, same thing still goes. You can just leave your questions as a comment and we'll throw them into the Zoom so that we'll be able to address them out here too. But yeah, Evan, maybe let's start with that. So what is a Civic Health Club? And Warm Cookies of the Revolution in particular. Yeah,
cool. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it'll be nice to hear from everybody here. I'm sure most people are involved with lots of cool stuff. So I'm excited to learn from everybody. So yeah, if Warm Cookies of the Revolution and Civic Health Club aren't confusing enough, maybe I'll try to confuse you more by explaining them. The general idea behind a Civic Health Club is you go to a gym where you exercise your muscles and you want to look better and feel better, and that we need that civically. And when I say civic, most people, maybe you took a civics class in school, maybe at some point. And so you learned about the 3 branches of government and fancy words like bicameral legislature that you had to memorize. So if that even was part of your world, that's one way of thinking of it. But another way is just thinking, what is it that we own? And that's how I usually express it to people is what do you feel ownership of, and how does that maybe change your behavior? And so what are the things that we collectively own? So most people, if you think about what you own, you think about your purse and your bicycle and a car or whatever else, computer. And most of us don't first off think about that I own the library, or I own the parks, or I own the water, or I own the radio waves, or the jail. But when you start thinking that way, you look at things differently, you take things differently, and that's a civic mindset. And I think we need more of that. We're seeing it right now. People are very much expressing that we own this community, and it needs to be very, very different. And so that's beautiful, and it's wonderful when people don't feel the need to have any invitation to that. But for a lot of people who are really busy and working on raising kids or whatever else it might be, most of us are pretty battered down, and you don't have a lot of time to think about that stuff unless it's immediately threatening you, or you have the luxury of a fair amount of time. And so for that big swath of us that are like, well, I'm working, I'm busy, I don't have a lot of extra time, we're also told, well, in that spare time and with that spare money, you should do what it is that you're into. And so that might be shopping, it might be art, it might be comedy, it might be hanging out with your family, it might be church, whatever it is. And so a Civic Health Club basically tries to approach that aspect of people and say, hey, we can do those things and then add a little bit of a civic element to them. We can include comedy in these things, so that we can work things out together, and have more of a say in the decisions that affect our lives. So I said it in sort of a boring way, but the way that we do it is we create programs where hopefully people want to come and want to take part, and they involve music and comedy and cars and wrestlers and whatever else. And we address really, really broad issues with people who are experts. And those experts might be residents. They might be people who study and are experts. They're often organizations that are working on these issues. So that's how we create them. And then we hope that we will sort of arm people with tools to take action with other groups usually who are doing that work. Though we have had some programs that we have had residents or people as part of our group lead. But a lot of it is like, this is what's going on. This is an interesting way here. This is a group that's doing it, and they need help and support in this way. So it's kind of a first step for a lot of people. I can give specifics maybe later on, but hopefully I explained it enough. And in terms of the name, because people always ask, Warm Cookies of the Revolution, it's a silly name. I have a career of only being with silly named things. Buntport was a made up word. Warm Cookies of the Revolution. I like cookies. I think we need revolution. I think that we can have fun while we're doing it, and we can nourish ourselves with good things like that. So yeah, that's the spiel. Challenge me if you like.
Yeah, jump on in, anyone. It does have that feel, though. I always felt that whenever I would come across it, like it is that invitation of like warm cookies and just something about the like a community space. I don't know if it's like harkening back somewhere psychologically to like cookies and milk after school, which I don't even think I ever had, but you always have it in your mind as like a notion of a thing you might have. But and actually, could you give maybe like one example of one of your events pre-pandemic, at least?
Sure. I'll give two because they'll show the different examples of the one bucket of things are sort of fun one-off programs. So let's see. We did one, we have one called The Huddle, which is on sports. So this is like, if you don't like sports, you can tune out right this moment. But for those that like sports, which is often people who aren't as in, that I'm painting with broad strokes, but a lot of times, if you go to a sports bar, you're talking with folks who are interested in sports and spend a lot of time on sports. And they're usually very smart people and very interesting people, and that's where they choose to use their time. And so we wanted to merge getting, all right, you like sports and you like football and fantasy football, we can tie in with issues, whether that be, we've talked about, who paid for the Broncos stadium and why is it in that neighborhood? Who makes money off it? Why the Air Force flies over? Why we sing the national anthem. So just through the lens of football, we got into issues of militarism, patriotism, gentrification, displacement, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a lot of programs like that are specific to different communities. There are comedy. We have a comedy one with Legos. We have a music series that's geared towards families in the morning with kind of hip bands. And then I'll go to the second bucket, which is longer term programs that continue for a while. Probably the best example was this was for multiple years. It was called This Machine Has a Soul. And it was, the goal of it was to get the city of Denver to adopt something called participatory budgeting. So the most boring sounding technical thing you can imagine, participatory budgeting. But it makes a huge impact. It's where residents of neighborhoods decide the city budget. It's something that people are returning to right now as talks of defunding police are coming. There's a lot more interest in this. But so what we did with that, there were residents leading these participatory budgeting processes where residents and students on the Auraria campus were deciding where they want money to go. And it was real money, and it actually went there. And at the same time, we were using arts as a way of engaging people, both in the process and also people who aren't part of the process, but to just learn about it. So that took the form of we built these little Rube Goldberg machines, or one Rube Goldberg machine, and that was explaining how the system works. And so we'd say, okay, well, if you had $1 million, what would you spend it on? And the group of people who were being trained say, oh, okay, we want sidewalks in our neighborhood. And we gave them a coin. They put the coin in, boop, 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 does all its stuff, and out printed. It said, thank you for your comments and concerns. And it was on the City of Denver letterhead, because that's how most people feel about public meetings. Come put the sticky note up. What do you want? And then you're like, now what? And then we built the second one. Hopefully I'm not taking too much time here. Cut me off if I am, Jenny. But the second machine that we built was to express, well, what is this? How could we change this process? What does a more participatory budgeting process look like? And it was more akin to sort of like a puzzle box or a puzzle room. People needed, you needed multiple people to put keys in at the same time. You had to share knowledge. You needed some expert advice. It was difficult. It was very fun. And ultimately, people were much more involved in it. So we had those as the beginning of an explanation. This is what we want and can dream of, and this is how it is. And then we ended up at the end, after years of interviews with people and doing this process, we had an installation that was in this 2-story garage. And that was a way to get people who weren't involved in the process to come and check it out, because it was kind of fun and interesting, and to learn about this. And I will say that we were successful for the 2020 budget. There was not insignificant amount, it's not huge, but $1.7 million was allocated for participatory budgeting in Denver. And there are people pushing right now for it to be a larger amount and to use participatory budgeting for like looking at the public safety dollars. So that had a very specific civic goal. That's why that's a separate bucket than just more informational, educational, getting people active.
Getting people, knowing that this is something that they can be thinking about or should be thinking about. So on that one, you mentioned like the fun part and also the interactivity, which I think are pieces that for a lot of the folks who I'm seeing here tonight, and also in our community as a whole, who like they come from puzzle rooms, or they come from theater, or they come from the experiential arts. I'm wondering where you see those pieces, because I heard you mention arts experience as a draw, which and I think your Creative Mornings talk, you said too, like you're at Buntport, kind of seeing people come and spend money to participate in arts experience or view an arts experience through theater. And then you would like go to civic meetings and no one was there. And Warm Cookies kind of came out of that, of like, okay, well, how do we get people excited and interested? And this is just gonna be a fun thing to go do. So I'm wondering a little bit about that piece, but then also like the interactivity, like the fact that they're, they're moving, they're interacting with the Rube Goldberg. Like, is there something there too? And maybe something specifically as we're thinking about folks who are in theater and participatory theater in particular, like where those intersections are?
Yeah, I mean, I go really back and forth on this stuff in terms of, I've shifted when I was at the theater as, just full time for a long time. I was okay with it being split in my head because I had an idea of like, we had a very specific aesthetic and clear goals. And now that I'm not at Buntport, I can say, I think what they are doing, like, I think it's great. And so I think there was an idea that like it's separated art and sort of like social critique or a message or something like that. And I wanted to bring them a little closer. And now that I've been doing Warm Cookies long enough, I also see how they can be separate. Sometimes really messaged, purposeful, action-based art. Like you just feel like you're getting hit over the head. And I think that that is self-selecting in the same way that people who just want art for art's sake is very self-selecting as well. And so, I think the more that you have truly diverse range of experiences, perspectives in the creative process, you're going to get a better mixture of that because you're gonna people just have different reasons, and so yeah, I go back and forth on because a lot of the stuff that we do sometimes is here's the point, this is what we're doing, we want you to act on this is our opinion, you should know this and you should feel this way. And we can't do anything otherwise. Anything otherwise would be silence, would be sort of neutrality. And sometimes that feels right. And sometimes it feels like it feels crappier, and sometimes it feels better. And the same can go on the other side. Like, oh, we made this quirky, interesting, fun experience, but man, we had all these people here, and we said like, that's something beautiful, but also, man, could we have done something more with this? So for me, that's the creative challenge. It feels the best when they mix seamlessly. Yeah, that usually feels the best, but it depends on the time. I mean, I think it's pretty tone deaf in the middle of a global pandemic and an uprising, to be making too much right now that either doesn't nod to it, or depending on who's making something, what you're saying, or deciding to step back, or being very purposeful, like this is an escape right now, like just knowing where you are and in some way acknowledging why you're doing it and who you are. I think it's important to know, and you can go all over the place on that. I don't know if I answered your question. I mean, I think to be a little more specific, I think that like, for people who are interested in it, people who make theater or are puzzle makers or do, circus or whatever it is, like at minimum, doing that is countercultural. It's needed, period. No matter who you are, no matter what your perspective is on that. Like if you are spending your time creating things for people to touch and feel and experience and do things in a different way, do it and keep doing it more, because that, like, that's different than being in accounts receivable somewhere, which people have to do. People have to have those jobs. But if you do that, keep doing it. And I think it's a privilege to be able to do it. And so you have to wrestle with like, well, all right, what am I doing with this kind of privilege to be able to do this as well?
It's interesting too, because I feel like in immersive arts, and I guess particularly something like a participatory or experiential theater, although in a way, perhaps other kinds of experiences too, there is this, and probably folks, who are right here could speak more to that. I actually might call upon one of them too in just a moment. There's this piece where a lot of the development of the experience is around like, how do you create a world or create a narrative, but also invite people to find their place within it, or kind of, have some kind of, oh my gosh, the word is, I am completely blanking on the word, but to be able to like make decisions that matter within a space. And is that a way that we can actually start to practice a kind of responsibility maybe within our decision making? And so Amanda, actually, who is among these creators, she's of the Catamounts, an experiential theater group based in Boulder. Yeah, you may know their work. You've been to some of their performances, and they've got one coming up soon too in August. In the chat mentions, I also think there's a middle ground in which art can be in between. So having that larger political resonance without being didactic. And maybe, I don't know if it is along those lines, but Amanda, would you be willing to say a little bit more about what?
Oh, that's exciting to hear you talk about that, Evan, like the difference between the two kinds of art. But like, I'm also interested in the art that can have a larger political resonance, but is perhaps like more analogous or metaphoric, or even things as simple as like casting, putting a historic bodies in historic contexts, or just diversely casting in a way that just makes an audience have to look at just like something as simple as stage pictures that are sort of outside of what we think of as the traditional stage pictures. Or so anyway, I just didn't know if you've had any experience with kind of doing something a little bit less sort of directly and a little bit more metaphorically.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that was where I was trying to go with that, was like this, for me, that's the sweet spot, is being able to do that. At Buntport, some of the shows that I really loved that we made there were, I think hit that kind of thing where it was always allegorical or some kind of animal or something like that. But we did a show, I think it was in like, I don't know, maybe 2004 or 5, called Vote for Uncle Marty. But we built a house, an upside down house, and everyone lived in the house, and we basically had the 5 characters had these different political perspectives, from the radical, which was like, this fucking house is upside down, don't you see it? Like, we got to turn it upside down, to to all the way to the person who's like, it's fine, we'll just make do with how it is, and no, it's not even upside down, and then everything in between. And so, but it was funny, it was a comedy, and it was, I mean, I think that's the power of comedy in that way. Like, I liked that show. We also did another one that was called The 30th of Baydock, which was, it was about the Bush administration, but that's not what it was about. If you came to see the show, it was about Turkmenistan, and it had there was a guy who worked and had a camel, and everything was on, nothing touched the floor, everything was hanging. So there was like, I love that kind of stuff. It doesn't, and that balance of how much you point out and how much you don't, how much you will let people fill in the blanks and how much you don't, that's a matter of taste or, you know, where you're at. But I think that's good. I mean, I also think and this is just the, like, I balk a little bit and balked when I saw the initial email of like the immersive, like I'm not even into that kind of title and immersive, like, of what it's come to mean maybe. I think this was where I was gonna go with what you were just saying, Jenny, was I think if you are part of any kind of community, and you do things within that community, there's often a immersive or participatory aspect to it. I think that for institutions or art forms that are kind of removed a little bit, like theater, often traditional theater is like, here is our place, you come to it, you buy a ticket, and we're pretending up here. You know, that then I think for the theater world, a lot of the immersive experiences has been like, whoa, this is pretty game changing in that sort of way, in people's perspectives. But, you know, we worked last year and we're doing it this year, and this is not a culture that I'm a part of. I'm just helping with some other people. But we've helped with the specific program, this cruise down Feds. And, you know, for decades, people have been cruising, and lowrider culture and car club culture I can't think of something more immersive. No one calls it immersive, but that's what it is. And it's a parade. It is such a uniquely American art form. And so anyways, yeah, it's like, it's sort of depending on who you're involved with. I know some folks who they do these hair braiding sessions, and it's amongst women in sort of a circle. And like, it's so immersive. It's such a beautiful generational thing, but it's not called that. And it's not, sometimes those things, they just are what they are. And I think that there's a community piece there that just makes it what it is. And it's not quite as reenactment. I think theater, because theater, there's an element of reenactment or whatever you're doing. But for the civic stuff, the stuff that I'm interested in, as it relates to sort of political and social change, I want nothing to do with reenactment. My interest in sort of radical activism is born out of, I mean, that was the other part of Warm Cookies, was I also saw the ineffectiveness of a lot of our protests. We come to the west steps of the Capitol, chant, speaker's gonna speak, we're all gonna yell, and the people driving by, to me, would look and see, what is it? What's going on there? It had the same effect as Civil War reenactors. If Civil War reenactors were on the west steps of the Capitol, you drive by and be like, oh, there's Civil War reenactors. Well, that's kind of weird. It was the same. It's like, oh, they're protesting, you know, whatever, Israel bombing Palestine or whatever the thing is. And it doesn't mean it's not right to be there. I don't think that the appropriate question is to look at effectiveness. And I'm only talking about people who are active in it. If you're not part of it, I don't think that there's not much weight to a critique. But if you're part of it, if you're an activist or you're part of what's going on, I think you should first be asking, is this right? So that might lead you to be the only person at a protest, but you should do it. And the second question, which should be very deeply serious, is this effective? And that was also why, you know, I'd started Warm Cookies, was to be like, I want to get all the people interested in sort of arts and fun stuff like this to get a little more civically active, but also some sort of activist folks, we need to rethink who we're bringing in, who's involved, who's making these decisions. I took this a little tangential to where you were going, but
No,
Much of life.
no, I think it's great. And actually, I mean, the immersive piece felt like, all right, I mean, no one ever really knows what immersive is. And that's been a discussion for a long time to begin with. And then a few of us have spoken about this, but I mean, it felt like sort of pandemic hit. I mean, I guess I'll say our interest in even kind of calling a thing immersive it felt like this open territory to bring people together from sort of across these different spaces that recognize themselves in experiential. The experiential arts of some kind and multisensorial, or just kind of bring all these pieces in and let's try and collaborate and let's build something there. And then the pandemic, just very recently hit, and then now suddenly everything goes to video, and for us, there was a moment, at least I felt this moment of, oh, also like we really haven't been reaching out and bringing like video people in, and then you start to really think about it, and it's really, there is a piece where the transformative potential of the arts, and like what it means to have an experience is at the core of so much work that would never call itself immersive. And actually, I fear that there's political piece to that too, of immersive, and it being this buzzword, and it kind of being this way of commodifying things that may have been immersive and not. But we will not take your time with that, although it is something within this community that I would love to chat more about. And actually, you probably, of all people, would be an amazing person to have some perspective on it, given the work that you do. But I want to pull from another piece of what you were just talking about, which is just the responsiveness too of an experience or of work to the context in which it's embedded. And so looking back at these few months, you told us a little bit about the work that you all as Warm Cookies did prior. What have these months looked like? Because you've come up with, I think, 3 kind of major projects. And yeah, could you walk us through a little bit those, maybe a little bit like what brought them together and like what made that the thing that you do, and just all the ways that you've been thinking about what you're doing differently or not differently, and creating in this way that now has to be largely on screens, or at least there's some advantage to doing it in that capacity.
Yeah. So yeah, like everyone, the pandemic really sort of threw a wrench into lots of things. So the first thing we did though is just really clear right away. Everyone I know lost most of their work right away, and so we made we were working, Molina Speaks and I were planning to do some programming, and then live programming, and then we just switched. And so we'd come up with, and then with Mary Grace Legg, we came up with this idea to do a gift basket, which was essentially just, this is a weird time. Everyone's in a very weird place. And that is what you give to people. I recently we had another kid, and not that this happened. I don't think anyone gave us a gift basket, but it made me think of it. People were nice. You drop off gift baskets in these moments of celebration. You give a gift. And then also when someone dies, that's when you get those things. And so this sort of fear, sadness, opportunity for something new, all that was going through. So we made this gift basket and essentially just went to a bunch of people that we know, different artists in totally different mediums. And we raised some money so we could pay everyone quickly and well, to make some, we gave little guardrails about how long and here's some things. It was essentially looking at what does it mean to be physically intimate or socially intimate? What does it mean to be socially intimate when you're physically distant? Because at the time, that's when everything was wash your hands and social distance. That's when we all learned those things. So we were looking at that, and it ended up, I thought it was pretty cool. It was a wide variety of people who made different things in different ways. But it was also, I think, right away, so many people were like, oh my God, what is happening? Zoom, we got to do everything. Zoom, we need to virtual this, virtual that. And it was so much, it was like, oh my God, everyone's just turned everything into virtual. And I remember thinking, especially for theater, I was like, oh God, please don't everyone start doing theater online. It's the worst. Live theater is the worst on video. And so, anyways, that's what that was. And it was just like, here, this is 54 minutes. Watch it if you want. Fast forward it if you don't like what you're seeing. And that's what that was. But it was kind of cool to see everyone in their own space and what they're making and how they're approaching it and where their brains are. So it was very intimate in some ways. The second project was something we were working on that was going to be this kind of carnival, and it was based on, we had done for many years, we did multiple years of this tax day carnival. And the point of that was very clearly, tax day is boring sounding. It is a day of mourning for everyone. But it's super important regardless of what you think of taxes. You might be like, I'm proud to pay, or I hate taxes. So we would bring all the nerdy tax people together and create this carnival, and showing, you do the ring toss and you're eating cotton candy, but you're learning about taxes. So we wanted to do that with the census. We had been asked by some folks in Aurora who were trying to reach some very hard to reach populations, specifically older adults in some specific, mostly refugee populations. So we worked with folks that we have kind of long standing relationships with who are in those communities. They kind of drove this. And it was going to be a live carnival, and then it became a virtual carnival. And so, but that wasn't really, we ended up, what's the word? Not publish. We ended up showing anyone that wants it. We made a compilation version, and you can see that. It's on our website, and I think it's on Facebook. But what these were short little 2-minute, mostly performances by a performer from one of these communities. And then they are speaking in the language, their language, to basically dispel myths about the census and to encourage people to fill it out. And so that was cool too, because there were some performers. One quick story of it. We needed someone who spoke Amharic for the Ethiopian community, and there was a former student of mine from a few years ago. I teach a class down at Colorado College, and I was talking to him because he does some arts around here now. He's graduated, and I was like, "Hey, who's someone that would be good for this in the Amharic community?" And I was like, "Extra points if they're a bit older." And he was like, "Oh, I don't know. I guess you could ask my mom." I was like, "Who's your mom?" Turns out his mom is the most famous dancer out of Ethiopia in the past 30, 40 years. I asked a few Ethiopian friends of mine, I said, "Hey, do you know Inye?" And they were like, "She's the best." Someone said, "I wanted to be her when I was a child." It's like I said, have you ever heard of Madonna? So anyways, that was cool. So there she is. She's doing that cool, the cool shoulder. I don't know what it's called, that sort of shoulder dancing in her backyard in Aurora. So that was the second project. We're calling it Census Carnival. But it's cool. Some of the performances are just, there's some real beautiful things there. And then the third one we just released, and that was with, I'm wearing her shirt, Carrie Joy. Carrie was, this was her doing. It's a new program that we're doing that we think can work in lots of communities where our plan is to try to have people do civic health club work in other communities. So it wouldn't be called Warm Cookies, but it would be a civic health club where you live. And so we're trying it out with different people kind of curating stuff here. So The Talk was the name of this. And the idea is that in lots of different communities, there is a version of The Talk where it's a generational discussion of something. So for Carrie, it's specifically in the Black community, the talk about protecting one's body from harm, from violence. And so this was a conversation, a fireside conversation about wisdom for survival and liberation within the Black community. But we might do it. We think that it might work for ranchers. The talk of are the younger generations going to continue to do this? There's the talk of with family members of coming out if you're gay. There's a lot, you can imagine it in a lot of communities. So anyways, this was cool. So Carrie did some performance, there was music by Such, and then there was a conversation. There were 4 folks who had a conversation about that topic and about sort of when they first understood what it meant to be Black, what it meant to, who taught them that, what does it mean, when did they learn they needed to protect their bodies, how do they see liberation and how they're a part of it. So it's cool. It was a cool conversation, and it was neat to be by the fire at night. That was kind of cool. So
yeah, I was going to say, it is, if I don't know if anyone here has gotten a chance to view it, but it is a literal fireside chat there around the fire. And I would say, I mean, there is an intimacy to that one. And I actually have not experienced your census carnival, but I have the virtual gift basket. And that I would say too, first of all of them you can find on the Warm Cookies of the Revolution site, on the videos page. And I would highly recommend checking them out, absolutely. And virtual gift basket is interesting because you kind of open it up and it's in Vimeo, and you are, I don't know, I was going in like, okay, I'm going to watch this video. I know, you recognize some of the names, Melina Speaks, Susie Q, like, okay, poetry, they're going to be reading, poems inspired by the pandemic. And then there was this intimacy to it of, first of all, it's not all, if I say that, poetry readings, first of all, it's not even all poetry, strictly speaking, but, it's a very different kinds of formats. I mean, Susie Q's amazing piece is kind of like a poem, but recipe, incantation that you just get pulled into. But all of them, there was an intimacy to it that, again, I think with the talk there felt that way too. I don't know if it was the creating the space. Do you have a sense of what gave it that? What gave those pieces that? Because as you were pointing to, like on video, that's hard. Like we're physically facing a screen, and yet there was that like bridge through a little bit more than with a lot of work I've seen.
I'm just going to attempt an answer, but I'll try to keep it brief because I don't know the answer. I think with the talk, it was maybe more obvious. It was, when you have 4 people with a couple of us sort of off camera sitting by a fire, it automatically, like, you stare into the fire, like that. If you go camping, that's your television. That's what the television sort of replaced. And so you speak softer, you open up a little bit, you're outside. I think that for that, it was definitely the fire and nighttime and people not sitting around talking with other people as much lately. So the excitement of that. So I think that comes across in the talk. I think with the gift basket, it was just right in the middle of when everyone was like, we are locked down, and people were feeling, it was like, this is never going to end. And so I think also people, for the most part, you're seeing people like Susie's piece, she's literally like this, and she's reading this recipe of cooking and how to make love. And that's what this is very intimate, if I'm talking to you like this, it's very intimate. But for some of the others, even the photographs that Juan and Armando put on there, those I felt were intimate too. Like, their style is intimate because it's usually people in doing what they're doing, but it was something about seeing, especially, at the end, Armando's are there and it's people joyful together. Like, they're all touching, they're all amongst people doing things. So I think there was maybe something reflective about that. That's my guess. Maybe someone else has a better answer, but that's just a guess.
Yeah, no, and what you mentioned too, and just maybe the intimacy of this, being invited into people's private spaces too. Because I'm thinking of like the reminders, and it's music, but even that has maybe something between the framing and the space and it's interesting though.
Yeah.
I wanted to pull in a question that it had been voiced a little while ago. I'm sorry it took us a while to get to, but do you have an example of an experiential project? I'm going to guess maybe, I mean, your own or others, which you felt was specifically effective in terms of accomplishing a civic goal? I mean, you gave us a little bit with participatory budgeting and thing, or maybe like what are some of the pieces that lets it do that?
Yeah. I mean, that one is the clearest example, sort of beginning, middle, end. We want participatory budgeting. All these residents led it. The sort of arts were in support of the civic goal. And then the goal was like, not only within the project we did, money was spent on what people wanted, but the city then is adopting it. But I think also, you know, we were, there was a group of, it's a refugee-run civic engagement group that asked us to work with them for a really specific goal. So this isn't as, the end result isn't as clear, but the civic action is. So the civic goal is clear, but it's not as clear as like, here's this budget to do this. And I thought, you know, they basically had this idea and they wanted us to do it. And I thought it was really cool. I'll try to be brief with it. So one of them came to this country, very educated, young, and had just served as a translator with the US Army and spent time with a bunch of Americans. Was dropped off here as a refugee, special refugee in Aurora, kind of the best case version of a refugee for the reasons I just mentioned. And he says the first 6 months he was here, he doesn't remember any of it. He's like, I ate, I went places, I couldn't tell you what. It was so weird. It was so hard. And he saw that so many other refugees, and specifically there in Aurora, come here under much worse circumstances. Many are illiterate in any language. They're fleeing. If you're a refugee, you're fleeing, you know, either political or ethnic persecution. And you're dropped off in a system that it's very difficult in this country, and it's very difficult as a refugee. You're supposed to find work very quickly. So what he was trying to do, there were kind of two things that we worked on with them. One was in their, so it's a very difficult time. And what most people want to do is just you focus. Okay, I'm here. I need to figure things out. I need to figure out how to get my kids doing this, or maybe learn English or get a job or whatever it is. And I don't want to be messed around with. I don't want to be persecuted like I was. And so people don't want to speak up. And what he noticed was that in this country, the opposite is how change happens. You have to push, and small groups of people pushing for what they want is how change happens. And the other example that he had was Trump was shooting his mouth off about this Muslim ban, and he and some other Muslims went to Mike Kaufman at the time and said, hey, if this happens, let us know and don't vote for it. And Mike Kaufman said, I can't do that and I won't do that. And what he saw, this is this friend of mine, Matham, he saw that, well, a couple things. A lot of North Africans and Middle Easterners on the census were, and then now again, are told to check white on the census. So Mike Kaufman has no idea how many people are there. But secondly, he doesn't hear from them. And so what Matham saw, because he also saw the numbers, 1 in 5 people in Aurora is born in another country. So he was like, we need to organize them and be louder. So the things that we worked with some ESL teachers, the first thing, this was all Matham's idea, was to, when they're learning in ESL, it's literally like Jane goes to the store. So this was an idea to say, well, Jane goes to a protest, or Jane goes to talk to her city council person, just to normalize it. But that time period, they start ESL right away. He and all the ESL teachers were like, you can't really, you got to chill out for that. But a little bit later is when they start civics classes to pass the test, essentially. And that is where what we came up with were, after talking with them, were basically think of a PowerPoint presentation that is all images with a little bit of text for the teacher, to get across the idea that this country is, it's more than just the things they're going to have to learn for the test. So we gave examples of like the Gang of 19 disability rights activists in Denver who kicked off what became the Americans with Disabilities Act, but it was 19 activists and other supporters who pushed for something. And so we sort of came up with a little bit of a curriculum there. So that's my answer to your question of like, this was using a bit of creativity for a civic goal that you can't measure it in a very specific way. There's others I can think of, but I think I'm talking a lot. So I'll stop for now.
We invited you here to do exactly that.
Yeah.
So you get to today. I will say we've only got a few minutes left, so if anyone does have questions, feel free, throw them in the chat, but also you can unmute your mic at the bottom and or do video and jump into conversation too.
Can I say one other thing I just thought of? Sorry, that was to that question. The crews, like the folks that are organizing and running the crews right now, cruises happen every week, but this specific one last year, and we worked with folks to push city council to make a proclamation, which they did, which was respecting and celebrating cruiser culture, lowrider culture, and it was specifically called which way did it go? Yeah, La Alma Park, Barnum Park Day. And so it was specifically saying like, this is where, people cruise in these areas from the north side down to the west side. And this was in response. So this is a very civic goal as well. This was in response to essentially newer residents mostly to the west side who don't like cruising. And they were like, this is loud, you're annoying, and they were on TV. And so this is an example of like of gentrification butting heads. And this is people saying, no, we're gonna do this and celebrate this. You moved into a neighborhood where this happens, and this is what we do. And so I think that there's a civic goal there. And then this year, we're gonna try to engage residents a little bit more also on there's the West Area Plan. So like, these are the things, this is the planning process that is going to shape from the city's perspective what neighborhoods around here look like for the next 10, 20 years. So again, that's sort of people are gathering for the cruise, and here's just a little bit of more information of ways they can get involved. Sorry to cut you off, Jenny. That just popped in my head.
No, I'm glad you did. Well, the question that's kind of on my mind is probably a little bit too big and ambiguous a question for like the last few minutes, but maybe we could, start it at least. I am curious on this notion, I guess, especially thinking about where we're at now, and we had started talking and planning for this event at the end of May, and a lot has changed about seeing demands made in public and people taking over public space in different kinds of ways, obviously, since then. I'm wondering, I guess, it's somewhere along the lines of, are there things like that, obviously the kind of voicing demands and imagining the future we want and kind of moving towards that is not going to go away as a civic need. Are there other dimensions that you feel, or in the conversations you've been part of, that have been coming in as kind of like, we also need to start kind of doing this or crafting this, or something that as we, where we've gotten to so far, where we're in the middle of right now is probably a better way to say it, like other ways of being or thinking, or, kind of sorting through our role as citizens and as people like that are entering in. And I guess I'm specifically thinking about it in terms of, I finally remember the word that I had been trying to get to before, of agency. But, within many immersive experiences, this notion of kind of a safe space to practice agency and to be making decisions in a way that that matter. They have results that you can see on the end story in some cases, depending on the kind of work that it is, but that comes up a lot of folks in our community, as well as that notion of just a transformative experience where people, like, it might be an open-ended story in some of the ways that Amanda was pointing to, but you do leave change. Like there is like a heart to it that you are kind of imbuing maybe people with, or there's just some like essences they can pull from. So yeah, so I mean, I guess it's more a constellation of thoughts than it is a question, but I feel, I've seen you navigating similar territories. Like, are there any pieces there as we're thinking about what, maybe like the question version is, what do some of the immersive and experiential arts in your mind, if they're interested in that civic thing, but maybe not in like a didactic way, like where do you see them maybe striving for doing in this period, or where are there interesting connections for creativity and the common good? Like, where do the arts intersect with in civic society? I mean, they do through all the work that you're doing, obviously, but as we're thinking of folks coming, right now, and then being very specifically maybe in a more arts side, like what does that look like?
I mean, I think in sort of organizing social justice-y world, a lot of times people at a meeting or an action or something, people talk about head, heart, and feet. And I think of that a lot with programs that we make of, is there something that connects to your head that you can learn or you wrestle with? Is there something that can connect in the heart that you connect with another person? It's an emotional connection in some sort of way. And feet, is there something that can move someone to act? I think a best case has some version of all three of those, but they don't have to. So when you're speaking about it artistically, you make what you make, and you do what you're compelled to do, and what is inspiring you. I think that what inspires you changes as you learn and grow, and who you're doing that with. So right now, I mean, that with the pandemic, but specifically with the uprising, is, what an opportunity to see, like, there are artists, like the artistry of what is going on right now which probably most people wouldn't title it that, is incredible and is making significant changes. And I think there's a lot to learn. I think there's a lot to learn there. And to the last part of your question, I mean, I look at the canvas for me in some sort of way is community life. And so I was mentioning to David right before this went on, a program we did a long time ago that we've done a bunch, that was called the Obstacle Course. And we've done it on all sorts of different things. But what we do is, it's about the creative process. And we specifically have artists come and talk about the creative process, and to talk about how limitations can be springboards, right? And because for a lot of people who don't call themselves artists or think of themselves as artists, they might not be as familiar with that concept, but they are in practice. If you're strapped for cash, you are creative as hell with your money, and you make it work. And I think that happens with like really nerdy stuff like urban planning, and with zoning, and with how you construct things, but also for the reimagining of well, how do we reimagine prisons? How do we reimagine police? If that's where people are at right now, how do we reimagine huge systems? There are lots of limitations in place. There are budgets, there are time constraints, there are deep cultural ties that are holding things down. But it doesn't mean it's done. That is what is a springboard to your creativity. And so I think if you're approaching things from an artistic place, and you are saying, well, I make art. See, for me, I shifted from the theater where art was more of a noun, and now it's more of a verb for me. But I think if you're starting from that place, it's what are you inspired by? And if you're trying to make some sort of civic change, why? Who are you? I don't mean that in a way of like, who are you to do this? I mean like, who are you where do you play in this process, and who else is making this with you? Because the perspective is going to change. It's going to be different. And I think wrestling with that will make better civic outcomes, but also likely will make a harder artistic process, and 50-50 chance if it's better or not. That's the other thing, is like the more cooks you have making art, it can get really hard. I know from working at the theater, it's collaborative, and we get into just fights and fights and fights, and we are a very homogeneous group. So the more you change that, it becomes difficult. But if you can do it right, it's better. It's much, much better for civic things specifically. I bet that wasn't a good answer to your question, but that's where my brain went.
It was an answer. That's what you're talking about, right? Like emergent, we see what emerges through this. That reminds me, actually, I mean, Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. It's sort of like messily in these worlds, but that piece reminds me of that, of just you kind of come together and see, and actually sometimes like having the action item and all the stuff that maybe from a business world, like we're sort of forced to do or to get the grants, like that is not necessarily where all kinds of change or community building or things come from. But that piece of, the community you build it with is really interesting. The first part reminded me too of Tony K. Bambara's The Role of the Artist is to make the revolution irresistible. Like maybe there's something there too, like we create, you sort of like listen or feel your way through, as an artist or a creator, maybe to the thing that, somehow embodies maybe where we're striving for, even before there's words for it.
I like that.
Well, thank you so much, Evan, for being here and talking with us and sharing a little about the work. So if people are interested in connecting, first of all, I guess, are there any specific kinds of ways, or what are the specific kinds of ways if people are interested that they can connect with you, and also where? So warmprigsoftherevolution.org, and some very social. But yeah, what is best? Are there things that?
Yeah, that's good. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Sometimes both of those. That's the best way. And right now, right now is a good time to we'll let you know when we're doing stuff, but we're in a holding pattern for a lot of live things right now, like everybody else. So I'd say just go support folks who are making huge change right now. It's beautiful to see amidst the chaos. And I'm sorry I didn't get to hear from so many other people who were on here, but next time I get to.
Quiet and share. Thank you, everyone who jumped on here too this evening. If you do, well, no, now we're at 59, so there may not be much time for questions, but you know how to reach out to Evan and find warm cookies. And absolutely some of the works that we talked through there. And then we don't have another Immersive Espresso scheduled coming immediately up, although as questions are on your mind or there's folks that kind of make sense to bring in or have for conversation, we hope you'll let us know. You could even host it if you wanted. They're really just about hopefully, kind of moments to at least come together as a community and continue to look at how in the wake of the pandemic, but then now also it's kind of all of these intensities of emotions and possibilities of some of the justice work going on, like where we are all left within that, and what we can do and create through it. So we will let you know as there are upcoming events. Definitely, if you don't get our newsletters, immersivedenver.org to sign up, which I just mentioned, because there are a few in-person works coming up beginning at the very end of July and into August, one by the Catamounts. Amanda's here this evening, and then another from Rainbow Militia, both with safe social distancing and private experiences in a certain sense, as well as Colorado Puzzle Rooms just all collaborated on an online project you can experience, and just kind of fun celebratory community news of people within our space here in Colorado doing amazing things in their industries. But otherwise, so nice to see you guys here. Thanks again to Evan and to all of you, and we hope that we'll see all again soon. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. See ya.